Mama Ruth lived in a small mud house at the edge of Ibadan. Every morning before the sun rose, she would wake up, tie her old wrapper and light her charcoal stove. Her hands shook as she fanned the fire, but she never complained. The smell of roasted corn filled the air as she arranged them neatly on a wooden table by the roadside. That was how she fed her children, Tund, Ao and Lara. She had once lived a happy life with her husband, Bamadil, a humble farmer who loved his family dearly. But everything changed when he fell sick one rainy season and never recovered. His death broke her heart, but she did not allow herself to fall apart. She looked at her 3 children, their faces full of fear and hunger, and told herself she must be strong for them. Life became harder each day. The roof of her house leaked whenever it rained, and sometimes she went to bed hungry so her children could eat. She sold roasted corn by the roadside under the hot sun and the heavy rain. Some days she earned enough to buy gari and beans. Other days she came home with nothing. But no matter what, she never lost her smile. When the children ate, she would sit and watch them with joy. Her hands were always rough from peeling corn and washing pots. Her feet were covered with dust, her clothes always old and faded. Yet she was proud. She often told her children, "Never forget who carried you when no one else could." It was her way of reminding them that love mattered more than money. Tund, the oldest, was a bright boy. He loved to study and often said, "Mama, one day I will buy you a big house." Mama Ruth would smile and reply, "My son, just grow into a good man. That will be enough for me." Ao, the second child, was playful but clever. He liked to help Mama count her earnings in the evening. Lara, the youngest, was gentle and soft-spoken. She loved to sing while helping her mother roast corn. Their laughter gave Mama Ruth strength. Every Sunday they walked together to church in their clean but simple clothes. Mama Ruth would sit quietly, listening to the pastor speak about faith and endurance. After church, she would hold her children's hands and say, "We may not have much, but we have each other. That is what matters." Her neighbors admired her strength and called her Mama Courage. As years passed, her children grew older. Tund gained admission to university with the help of a kind teacher. Mama Ruth cried tears of joy the day he left. She sold extra corn to help him buy books and clothes. Sometimes she went without food to save more for his school fees. Ao later joined a technical school, and Lara finished secondary school with good grades. Mama Ruth worked even harder to support them all. There were days she sat alone at night, her hands trembling from exhaustion. The wind blew through the cracks in her wall, and she could hear rats running under the bed. She would whisper prayers in the dark, thanking God for keeping her children safe. She believed that her suffering would soon end, that her children would lift her out of poverty. One afternoon, after hours of roasting corn, she fainted from the heat. A neighbor rushed to help her and gave her water. When she woke up, she smiled weakly and said, "I cannot stop. My children must eat." Even in pain, she kept working. When Tund finally graduated, he got a job in Lagos. He called his mother with excitement. "Mama, I got the job," he shouted. Mama Ruth jumped up, laughing and crying at the same time. "God is good. My son, I told you hard work never fails." She danced around her small yard that day, thanking God. Later, Ao opened a small shop with the help of a friend. He sent his mother a little money sometimes, and she was always grateful. Lara started working as a nurse's assistant at a clinic. For the first time in years, Mama Ruth felt peace. She thought her suffering was finally ending. But slowly things began to change. The calls from her children became less frequent. When she called, they often said, "Mama, I'm busy." At first she understood, life in the city was fast. But soon their visits stopped completely. Months passed before she saw any of them again. She would sit on a small wooden chair outside her house every evening, waiting for a visitor who never came. Her neighbors noticed and asked, "Mama Ruth, have your children forgotten you?" She smiled sadly and replied, "They are just busy. One day they will remember." But deep inside, her heart ached. Sometimes she would look at the framed photo of her children on the wall. She would run her finger over their smiling faces and whisper, "My babies, wherever you are, may God protect you." Tears would fall silently as she prayed. She missed them terribly, their laughter, their chatter, their hugs. She continued selling corn even though her back hurt and her eyesight was getting weak. Her body was old, but her spirit stayed strong. Whenever customers complained that her corn was too burnt, she would smile and say softly, "Ima binu, my child. It is the fire's fault." People loved her humility. Some gave her small tips, others offered food. At night, she often sat by the window, staring at the moon. She remembered how her late husband used to hold her hands under that same moonlight. If only he were here, she would whisper. Maybe things would be easier. But then she shook her head and smiled again. God knows best. Despite the loneliness, Mama Ruth's heart remained pure. She never spoke badly of her children. When others said, "Your children have abandoned you," she would simply reply, "No, they will come when the time is right." Her faith and love never faded. Sometimes she dreamt of Tund walking through the gate with a big bag of food. Other nights she dreamt of Ao bringing new clothes for her. But when she woke up, there was only silence. She would sigh and say, "Tomorrow will be better." Then she would rise, tie her wrapper and prepare her corn once more. One morning while she was roasting corn, a little boy came to her stand. He said, "Grandma, can you give me one? I am hungry." She looked at him. His clothes were torn and his face was tired. Without hesitation, she gave him 2 pieces of corn and said, "Eat, my child. Hunger is not a friend." The boy smiled and thanked her. Watching him eat filled her heart with joy. It reminded her of her own children when they were small. That night, she sat quietly, her eyes full of tears but her lips curved in a faint smile. "Even if the world forgets me," she whispered, "God never will." Her heart still carried love for her children, no matter how far they had gone. Though her life was full of struggle, Mama Ruth remained gentle, humble, and strong. Her story was one of sacrifice, the kind that only a mother's heart can understand. She gave her all so that her children could rise, even if it meant she had to walk alone. And every morning as the sun rose over Ibadan, she would whisper her prayer before lighting her charcoal stove again. A prayer of gratitude, of hope, and of love that never faded. It was a quiet night in Ibadan. The moon was high, and the streets were silent except for the sound of crickets. Mama Ruth sat inside her small wooden house, peeling roasted corn for the next day's work. The little oil lamp on her table flickered weakly. The air was still, but something felt strange that night. The wind blew harder than usual, pushing the flame back and forth. Mama Ruth looked up at the lamp and whispered, "Stay with me a little longer, old friend. I still need your light." She was tired from a long day of work. Her back ached, her fingers were sore, and her eyes burned from the smoke. Still, she smiled softly as she looked around her small room. On one side stood her old wooden bed, on the other, a small table where she kept a framed photo of her children, Tund, Ao, and Lara. She touched the picture gently. "My children," she said softly, "I miss you every day. I hope you are eating well." Just then a spark flew from the lamp. She tried to cover it quickly, but the wind pushed through the open window, knocking the lamp onto the floor. The flames spread fast, licking the old mats and dry curtains. Mama Ruth gasped. "Oh Lord, help me," she cried as smoke filled the room. She ran to grab a bucket of water, but it was too small to stop the fire. The flames grew higher, burning through her bed, her clothes, and the only photo she treasured. She ran outside, coughing and crying, shouting for help. "Fire! Fire!" she screamed. A few neighbors rushed out with buckets of water, but it was too late. The dry wood burned quickly, and within minutes, her house collapsed into ashes. The neighbors pulled her away from the flames as she cried helplessly. Her life, everything she worked for, was gone. Her savings, her small box of clothes, even her husband's old shirt, all gone in one terrible night. Mama Ruth fell to her knees, her face wet with tears. My God," she whispered, "why tonight?" The cold air bit her skin as she looked at the black smoke rising into the sky. Her neighbors tried to comfort her, but she could barely hear them. All she could see was the glowing fire that once was her home. When the fire finally died down, she sat on the ground beside the ashes. The night felt endless. Her hands trembled as she reached into the debris, hoping to find something, anything, that survived. But there was nothing. She found only pieces of burnt wood and ashes that slipped through her fingers. Her heart broke quietly in the darkness. A kind neighbor named Mama Kemi came to her side and placed a shawl over her shoulders. "Come sleep in my house tonight," she said gently. "You can't stay here." But Mama Ruth shook her head. "No, my sister. Let me stay. This was my home." Her voice was weak but firm. She could not leave the place where her memories had turned to dust. Later, when the night grew colder, she sat alone and decided to call her children. Her hands shook as she reached for her small old phone. She dialed Tun's number first. It rang twice before he picked up. "Mama," he said quickly, "I'm in a meeting. Can I call you later?" His voice sounded distant and busy. She tried to speak, but he had already hung up. She stared at the phone, her heart heavy. She tried Ao next. It rang for a long time before he answered. "Mama, what's wrong?" he asked, sounding half asleep. "Ao, my house burned down. she said, her voice trembling. I have nothing left. Ao sighed softly. Mama, I'm sorry. I'll send something tomorrow. Please don't worry. She wanted to say more, but the line went silent. He had ended the call. Finally she tried Laura. It went straight to voicemail. Mama Ruth called again and again, but no answer came. The last bit of hope inside her heart began to fade. She looked at the phone in her hands and whispered, so this is how it ends. The night grew colder and she could see her breath in the air. She had no blanket, no bed, nothing but the clothes on her back. The stars above her looked distant, as if even heaven was far away. She pulled the shawl tighter around herself and whispered, even in the dark, I will still thank God. Tears ran down her cheeks as she began to pray softly. She prayed for strength, for her children, for peace. She prayed not for things but for courage to face tomorrow. When morning came, the smoke was gone. Only ashes remained where her home once stood. Chickens walked through the ruins, pecking at the ground as if nothing had happened. Mama Ruth sat quietly, staring at the sun rising over the rooftops. Her eyes were red from crying, but her spirit refused to break. Mama Kemi brought her a small bowl of pap and said, eat something, my sister. Mama Ruth smiled weakly. Thank you, she whispered. She ate slowly, every spoonful heavy with sadness. After eating, she stood up and looked around one last time. She saw the burnt tree beside her house, the remains of her cooking pot, and the ashes where her children's photo once lay. She took a deep breath and said softly, there is nothing left here for me. She walked into the small room that survived part of the fire and found her old bag. Inside she placed her Bible, a wrapper, and her broken phone. That was all she had left in the world. As she stepped outside, Mama Kemi called out, where are you going? To the city, Mama Ruth replied quietly. I cannot stay here. I will find work. I will start again. You cannot go alone, the neighbor cried. But Mama Ruth smiled sadly. God will go with me. She began to walk down the dusty road, her bare feet touching the cool earth. The morning sun touched her face gently, drying her tears. Every step she took was heavy, but she did not stop. She passed the small market where she once sold corn. The traders looked at her with pity. Some whispered, is that not Mama Ruth? What happened to her? She did not answer. She just kept walking. The city was far, but she did not care. All she knew was that she had to move forward. Her heart hurt deeply, but she held her Bible close to her chest. As she walked past the fields, she remembered her husband's voice. Ruth, no matter what happens, keep your faith. By the time she reached the bus stop, the sun was high. She sat on a wooden bench, tired and hungry. She had no money for food or transport. A young man selling sachet water noticed her and asked, Mama, are you okay? She smiled faintly and said, I am fine, my son. Just resting. He gave her a sachet of water for free. She thanked him and drank slowly, grateful for his kindness. The hours passed and she finally found a truck driver heading to the city. He looked at her kindly and said, Mama, where are you going? She replied softly, anywhere I can start again. The driver nodded and let her climb in the back with the goods. As the truck moved away, Mama Ruth looked behind her one last time. She watched the small village fade into the distance. Her heart felt both heavy and free. She whispered to herself, everything is gone, but I am still alive. That night, when the city lights came into view, she smiled through her tears. She was alone, but she carried something no fire could destroy, her faith, her strength, and her hope that one day life would shine on her again. The city was loud and full of life. Cars honked endlessly, people shouted as they sold goods, and music played from every corner. But among all that noise, Mama Ruth walked slowly, tired and lost. Her wrapper was dusty and her slippers were worn out. She carried a small bag that held everything she owned, a Bible, a piece of cloth, and an old photograph burnt around the edges. 4 days she wandered around the streets looking for a place to rest. She had no family here, no friends, and no home. When night came, she found an empty space under a bridge near the market. The ground was rough, but it was dry. Around her were other homeless people. Old men, women with children, and young boys who slept on pieces of cardboard. They looked at her quietly as if asking who she was. Mama Ruth smiled weakly and said, "Good evening, my people." A few nodded back. That night, she lay down on her wrapper and stared at the dark sky. The sound of passing cars above her head mixed with the distant cries of babies. She felt small in the big city, yet she whispered, "God, thank you for giving me another day." Hunger burned in her stomach, but she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. The next morning she woke up before sunrise. The city was still half asleep, but she could already smell food from the market. She stood up, brushed off the dust, and walked toward the sound of voices. Traders were setting up their stalls, arranging vegetables, bread, and fish. Mama Ruth greeted them politely, hoping someone would offer her a little work. But most just looked away, too busy with their own problems. Hours passed and her hunger grew. She hadn't eaten since the day before. Her legs trembled as she walked past a small food stall. A woman was selling bread and beans there. The smell made her mouth water. She stopped for a moment, just looking. The woman noticed her and said, "Mama, are you okay?" Mama Ruth nodded quickly. "Yes, my daughter. I am fine." But her weak voice betrayed her. The woman looked closer and saw how thin she was. "Come," she said kindly, breaking a piece of bread and handing it to her. "Eat something." Mama Ruth hesitated. I don't have money," she said softly. The woman smiled. "Don't worry. God will bless me in another way. Eat." Tears filled Mama Ruth's eyes. She took the bread with both hands and whispered, "Thank you, my child. May God bless your kindness." As she ate slowly, she asked the woman's name. "I am Madame Binta," the woman said proudly. "I sell food here every morning." Mama Ruth nodded. "You have a good heart," she said. "Many people pass by and pretend not to see." When she finished eating, Mama Ruth looked around the stall. The floor was messy with sand and leaves. She stood up quietly, picked up a broom nearby, and began to sweep. Mama, you don't have to do that," Binta said quickly. But Mama Ruth smiled. "Let me help. It is my way of saying thank you." From that day she came every morning to help Madame Binta clean. She swept the floor, washed the pots, and fetched water from the nearby tap. She never asked for payment. She only said, "It makes me happy to work." Her gentle spirit touched everyone who saw her. After a few weeks, Madame Binta called her aside. "Mama Ruth," she said, "you have been helping me every day without asking for anything. You are too kind. I want you to work for me properly. I will pay you small money." Mama Ruth's eyes widened. My daughter, you don't have to." "I insist," Binta said, smiling. "I need someone honest, and you are the best person I know." That day, Mama Ruth started working officially as a cleaner in the food stall. Her job was simple: sweep, wash, and keep the place neat. The pay was small, but to her it felt like gold. Every evening, Binta gave her some coins and she would smile and say, "God bless your hands." She kept her money carefully in a small cloth tied around her waist. Even though she earned little, she never wasted a single coin. At night, she returned to her place under the bridge. She shared food with others who had nothing. When someone was sick, she stayed by their side. When someone was sad, she told them stories about hope. Soon, people began to call her Mama Kindness. She laughed when she heard the name. "I am just doing what a person should do," she would say. One evening, a little boy who lived under the bridge came to her crying. "Mama, my stomach is hurting," he said. She touched his forehead. It was hot. Without thinking twice, she took the little money she had saved that week and went to buy medicine from a nearby pharmacy. She gave it to the boy and stayed with him all night until he felt better. The next morning, the boy's mother came to her with tears. "Mama Kindness, you saved my child. May God bless you." Mama Ruth only smiled. "All children are God's children," she said. "We must care for each other." Days turned into months. The people at the market grew to love her. They often brought her small gifts: a cup of rice, a wrapper, sometimes even soap. She became like a mother to everyone. But no one knew her story. No one knew she once had children who had forgotten her. Sometimes when she was alone, she would sit at the back of the stall and look up at the sky. The city lights shone brightly, but her heart still felt a small emptiness. She would whisper quietly, "Tund ao Lara, wherever you are, may God keep you safe." Then she would wipe her tears and go back to work, smiling as if nothing was wrong. One Sunday morning, Madame Binta noticed her praying by the stall before opening. "Mama Ruth," she said, "you are always so thankful even when life is hard. How do you do it?" Mama Ruth smiled softly. "My daughter, when you lose everything, you learn that being alive is already a gift. If I can wake up, breathe, and see another day, that is enough to thank God." Binta nodded slowly, touched by her words. She didn't know that behind that smile was a woman who had suffered so much. But Mama Ruth never complained. She believed that gratitude kept her strong. One day, a young journalist visited the market to write about the traders. When he met Mama Ruth and heard people call her Mama Kindness, he asked, "Mama, why do they call you that?" She laughed softly and said, "Because kindness is free, my son. Even when you have nothing, you can still give a smile." The journalist smiled back. "You speak with so much wisdom," he said. She looked at him and replied, "Wisdom comes from pain, but peace comes from forgiveness." That evening when the market closed, Mama Ruth sat quietly beside the road, counting her coins. She had saved enough to buy a small mat and blanket. It was a big moment for her. For the first time since her house burned, she would sleep comfortably. She thanked God again and again. The people around her admired her strength. They often said, "That old woman, she is special. She brings peace wherever she goes." And indeed she did. Her presence made people kinder. Children smiled when they saw her. Strangers greeted her warmly. Though life on the streets was hard, Mama Ruth's heart stayed pure. She never allowed bitterness to take root. Her laughter, her faith, and her gentle ways made the harsh world a little softer. And as she lay under the bridge each night, looking at the stars through the gaps above, she whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for this life. It may be small, but it is still beautiful." 3 years had passed since Mama Ruth lost her home and started her new life in the city. The market had changed, the faces around her had changed too, but her gentle heart remained the same. Every morning she still swept Madame Binta's stall, washed the dishes, and greeted every customer with a warm smile. She was older now, her back slightly bent, her hair completely gray, and her hands thin and wrinkled. But when she smiled, her eyes still shone with kindness. Everyone in the market respected her. They called her Mama Kindness, and some even came just to hear her stories or her soft words of comfort. One hot afternoon she heard people talking excitedly about a big event coming to the city. "They say a company from Lagos is coming to give food and clothes to the homeless," one man said. Mama Ruth nodded happily. "That is a good thing," she said. "May God bless them." She didn't know that the company belonged to her first son, Tund. Tund had done well for himself. His company had grown fast and people praised him for being smart and hardworking. But deep inside he carried a small emptiness. He had everything, money, cars, and a big house, but he still felt like something was missing. He rarely spoke about his mother, and whenever the topic came up, guilt filled his heart. Ao had also become successful. His small shop turned into a big one, and he started working with Tund's company. Lara, now a nurse, was doing well too. They lived comfortable lives but not peaceful ones. None of them had spoken to Mama Ruth in years. When the idea of organizing a charity event came up, Tund agreed immediately. "Let's give back to the community," he said in a meeting. "Let's feed the poor." The idea made him feel proud. He thought perhaps this act of kindness would help him feel whole again. He invited Ao and Lara to join, telling them it would be good publicity. They both agreed. The day of the event arrived. The city square was filled with people, the homeless, beggars, widows, and children with empty bowls in their hands. A long table was set up with food and drinks. Tund wore a clean white shirt with his company logo. Ao and Lara stood beside him, smiling as cameras flashed. They were surrounded by reporters, volunteers, and curious onlookers. Mama Ruth arrived early that morning with other market women to help. She had heard about the event from Madame Binta and wanted to volunteer. "You don't have to work, Mama," Binta told her. "They are serving you people today." But Mama Ruth shook her head and smiled. "No, my daughter. My hands are not too weak to serve others. God has given me strength, let me use it." She wore her faded blue uniform and tied her wrapper tightly around her waist. When the food was ready, she joined the line of volunteers serving rice and beans to the crowd. The sun was hot, sweat rolled down her face, but she worked with a joyful heart. As she served each person, she smiled and said softly, "Eat well, my child. God loves you." Across the table, Ao was helping to hand out drinks. He was laughing with another volunteer when his eyes caught something. An old woman standing opposite him, serving food with slow, gentle hands. For a moment he froze. The way she moved, the way she smiled, the way she spoke, it all felt familiar. His heart began to beat fast. He leaned forward, trying to see her face clearly. When she turned slightly, the world around him seemed to stop. The wrinkles, the eyes, the gentle smile, it was her. "No, it can't be," he whispered. His hands trembled and the bottle he was holding slipped and fell to the ground. The sound caught Lara's attention. "Ao, what's wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just pointed toward the woman. Lara followed his gaze, and when she saw her, her mouth opened in shock. "That's Mama?" she whispered in disbelief. Her knees grew weak and tears filled her eyes. Tund, hearing the commotion, turned to look. When his eyes met the old woman's face, his heart stopped. "Mama, is that really you?" he said, his voice shaking. Mama Ruth looked up slowly. For a moment she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. 3 grown faces stood before her. faces she had seen only in her dreams for years. Her hands shook and the spoon she was holding dropped into the pot. "My children, how are you?" she said softly, her voice trembling but gentle. The crowd fell silent. People turned to look as Tund, Ao and Lara stepped closer. None of them could speak at first. Tears rolled down their cheeks as they fell to their knees before her. The cameras stopped clicking. The only sound was the quiet sobbing of the three siblings. "Mama, please forgive us," Lara cried, holding her mother's hands tightly. "We left you when you needed us most. We didn't call, we didn't visit. We were blind." Ao bowed his head low, his shoulders shaking. "Mama, I was foolish," he said in a broken voice. "You called and I ignored you. I thought I was too busy, but I was just lost." Tun could barely speak. His voice broke as he said, "Mama, I promised to take care of you. Instead, I turned away. Please forgive me." Mama Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled softly. "My children," she whispered, "my heart forgave you long ago." She placed her trembling hands on their heads and continued, "A mother's heart does not hold hate. I prayed for you every day." The people watching began to cry too. Some covered their mouths, others wiped their eyes. It was a moment of deep emotion, love, guilt, and forgiveness all mixed together. Even the reporters lowered their cameras in respect. Mama Ruth helped her children to stand. She looked at them closely as if memorizing their faces again. "You have grown so much," she said, her smile gentle. "You look strong. God has been good to you." Lara could not stop crying. She touched her mother's hands and whispered, "Your hands are so rough, Mama. You suffered so much." Mama Ruth chuckled softly. "These hands carried you, my child. They are not tired." Tun turned to the crowd and said, "Everyone, this is my mother. The one who gave me everything I have. I left her when I became successful, and that was my biggest mistake." His voice cracked as he spoke. No amount of money can replace a mother's love. People clapped and cheered softly. Some came forward to hug Mama Ruth. Madame Binta, who had been helping at another table, rushed over and held her hand proudly. "So these are your children?" she asked with a big smile. Mama Ruth nodded, her eyes full of tears. "Yes, my children have come home." The rest of the day the three siblings stayed close to their mother. They served food with her, talked with her, and listened to her laugh. For the first time in years they felt peace. The guilt in their hearts began to melt as they realized how much love still lived in the heart of the woman they had abandoned. As the sun began to set, Mama Ruth looked at her children and said softly, "My babies, it is never too late to come home. Love always finds its way back." They nodded, tears still in their eyes. When the event ended, they walked her to a car. People watched and smiled as she got in, her children by her side once again. The road ahead was quiet, but in their hearts, something new had begun, a healing they never thought possible. And as the car drove away, Mama Ruth looked out the window, whispering a simple prayer of thanks for the miracle she had waited 3 long years to see. After that unforgettable day at the charity event, everything changed for Tund, Ao, and Lara. The shame they felt had shaken their hearts, but it also opened their eyes. They finally understood what they had lost, not money or property but something far greater, the love of their mother. That evening the three of them took Mama Ruth to a small guest house nearby. They bought her new clothes, gave her a warm bath and made sure she ate properly. She smiled the whole time, watching her children argue gently about who would do what. "You are all grown now," she said softly, "yet still my little ones." Her voice was calm and full of warmth. Tund looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Mama, from now on you will never suffer again. I promise you." Ao nodded quickly. "We will take care of everything. You'll live comfortably. You deserve peace now." Lara held her mother's hand tightly. "We will never leave you again, Mama. Never." Mama Ruth smiled, but her eyes carried wisdom. "My children," she said gently, "I am not angry. All I ever wanted was to see you together, loving one another. That is more precious than gold." The next day they took her back to Ibadan, her hometown. The road was long but the journey felt like healing. As the car moved through the villages, Mama Ruth stared out the window quietly. The green fields, the red earth, the sound of children playing, everything reminded her of the life she had once lived. She whispered softly, "God, thank you for bringing me home." When they arrived, Tun surprised her. "Mama," he said proudly, "we built something for you." They drove to a small piece of land near the outskirts of the town. There stood a simple but beautiful house, painted cream with a little garden in front and a wooden chair on the porch. Mama Ruth's eyes widened. She covered her mouth with her hands, unable to speak. "Mama," Ao said with a grin. This is your new home. It's yours. Mama Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She walked slowly to the door, touching the walls gently as if she couldn't believe they were real. You built this, for me? She whispered. Yes, Mama, Lara said softly. You gave us everything. This is the least we could do. Mama Ruth stood in the middle of the small living room. It was clean, bright, and full of love. On the table lay a basket of fruits, some flowers, and a framed photo of her children. She smiled through her tears. This house is beautiful, she said. But do you know what makes it truly beautiful? What, Mama? Tund asked. The hearts that built it, she said, placing her hand over her chest. From that day on, Mama Ruth lived peacefully. Her children visited her often, and sometimes they all sat on the porch, laughing and talking about old times. Tund often said, Mama, you gave us strength. Ao would reply, and patience. Lara would add, and love. Mama Ruth laughed every time. Then my work was not in vain, she said. But even with her new house and all the comfort her children gave her, Mama Ruth never forgot the people she once lived among. The poor, the hungry, the lonely. Every week, she cooked food and went back to the city with a basket full of rice and bread. Her children worried at first. Mama, you don't need to go there again, Ao said one morning. You've done enough. Mama Ruth smiled gently. My son, she replied, love is not something you stop giving when you have enough. It grows when you share it. So, every Saturday she visited the same streets where she had once slept. The people there recognized her immediately. Mama Kindness, they shouted when they saw her. She hugged them one by one, giving them food and soft words of encouragement. One young woman asked her, Mama, you have a house now and rich children. Why do you still come here? Mama Ruth smiled. Because love is richest when it's shared, she said. If I eat alone, my heart is not full. But when I share with others, I taste true joy. Word spread across Ibadan about the kind old woman who had been homeless but now helped others. Many people came to hear her speak. Some called her the Mother of Mercy. One day, a local journalist visited her to write her story. Sitting on her porch, Mama Ruth told him everything. Her struggles, her loss, her children's return, and her forgiveness. The journalist asked, Mama Ruth, after all you went through, what lesson would you like others to learn from your story? Mama Ruth looked up, her face calm and wise. Forgive quickly. Love deeply. And never forget the hands that raised you, she said softly. A mother's love is not measured by what she receives, but by what she gives. And children must remember that no matter how far they go, the road home is never closed. When the story was published, it touched the hearts of many. People across the town cried as they read it. Some called their mothers that very day. Some went home to visit after years apart. Tund's company grew even bigger, but he no longer cared only about money. He built a foundation in Mama Ruth's name, the Mama Kindness Foundation, to help widows, orphans, and the homeless. Ao managed the charity projects, and Lara organized free medical care for poor families. Together, they continued their mother's work. At every event, Mama Ruth sat quietly in a chair, watching her children help others. Whenever people clapped for her, she smiled and said, Don't clap for me. Clap for love. That is the true miracle. Years passed and Mama Ruth grew older and weaker. But even when her legs could no longer walk far, she still found ways to give. Children from the neighborhood often came to her home for food or advice. She told them stories about kindness, forgiveness, and faith. One afternoon, she sat outside under a mango tree, surrounded by children. She said, Do you know what true success is? They all shook their heads. True success, she said, is when your heart is rich, not your pocket. It is when you can sleep peacefully knowing you have not hurt anyone, and when others smile because of you. The children clapped and cheered. They loved Mama Ruth's stories. Later that evening, Tund came to sit beside her. Mama, he said softly, you've changed our lives. You've shown us what real love means. Mama Ruth smiled at him. I only showed you what was already inside you, my son, she said. Love was always there. It just needed to be remembered. As the sun set, the golden light bathed the little house in warmth. The sound of laughter came from inside where Ao and Lara were preparing dinner. The smell of stew filled the air, and birds sang softly in the distance. Mama Ruth leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the peace around her. A gentle smile stayed on her face. She whispered quietly, Thank you, Lord. My children have found their way. That night, they all ate together, a family once broken, now whole again. From that day forward, the people of Ibadan often told her story to their children. a story of love, forgiveness, and gratitude. They would say, "Remember Mama Ruth, the woman whose children abandoned her but came back to learn the meaning of love?" And every time someone shared that story, hearts softened and tears filled eyes. Because everyone who heard it learned one simple truth: no treasure in this world shines brighter than a mother's love.